Thank you, Chairman. This is a great hearing. As you know, the federal government is spending money like it's going out of style. Last year, it spent nearly $7 trillion, and the revenues were $5.2 trillion. Nobody in this country can do that. Nobody can do it in their personal life. Businesses can't do it, only the federal government. We're being forced to borrow another $1.9 trillion to make up for it. It's one of the reasons that we now have over $36 trillion worth of debt, and we're heading quickly to 37. Over the last 4 years, while the population has grown 2%, the federal government has increased spending by 53%. They've added $8 trillion to national debt in 4 years. This is not sustainable. If nothing changes, our federal government is on track to add $1 trillion to the federal debt every 180 days. The cost of this debt is another massive problem. Right now, more than $1 trillion of money that hardworking Americans pay in taxes each year is just going to pay the interest on their federal debt. That's a waste. So I'm very appreciative of what President Trump's doing and what DOGE is doing to try to find all this waste. They're going agency by agency, one by one, and finding out how every single dollar is spent and making sure it's spent in the best interest of the American public. Unfortunately, many Democrats among this committee have expressed outrage. But the outrage is better suited for some of the absurd, wasteful spending they've already uncovered. Let's look at USAID. They provided full funding for al-Qaeda terrorist Anwar al-Awlaki to attend college in Colorado. They gave $310 million to start a Palestinian cement factory, which is used to help Hamas build terror tunnels into Gaza. How can you be this stupid? Another $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and to business communities. How does that help an American? $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. How does that help America? $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. How does that help America? A multi-year study from the Middle East Forum uncovered $164 million of approved grants to radical organizations, $122 million going to groups aligned with designated terrorists. How does that help Americans? And billions more to add charities that have histories of failing to vet their terror-tied partners. The families I represent would agree that's not how they want their tax dollars spent. They'd rather have their tax dollars spent putting Americans first or advancing our interests abroad, not funding terrorism against us or allies or funding some fringe globalist agenda. So I'm very appreciative of what President Trump has done. I appreciate what DOGE is doing, and I appreciate that Marco Rubio, our ex-colleague, is doing running the state. So, Mr. Schellenberger, DOGE also discovered that the Biden administration spent millions of dollars on subscriptions to left-leaning media outlets like Politico. The Biden administration censored certain media and Americans online that didn't favor the administration's narrative, and now we see that their administration was essentially financing media outlets to favor them. How is this not a conflict of interest, and what do you think of this?
Yeah, I agree it's a huge conflict of interest, and it's really just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, what we uncovered in our reporting is that the USAID has basically been bankrolling an organization called the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which has been in the process over the last decade and a half of really taking over so-called independent investigative journalism around the world, usually relying on strategic leaks by the intelligence community, but with an aim to really undermine the independence of investigative journalism. When we started investigating these guys, they threatened to sue us right away. They have a $9 million fund just to sue people. It's called Reporters Shield, but it's an offensive weapon that they use to basically shut down any inquiry into what they're doing. And we've even seen now, we've now traced that USAID money to investigations that were essential to the 2019 impeachment of President Donald Trump, and then also to the Russiagate hoax, particularly spreading misinformation and malinformation about Trump's alleged ties to the Russians. Of course, one of the greatest conspiracy theory of the recent era, which alleged that because President Trump banked with Deutsche Bank, and that there were Russians, oligarchs, who also banked with Deutsche Bank, that there had to be some sort of a conspiracy. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, sir. It's really a deep corruption of so-called mainstream independent media.
Based on your investigation, you also talk about how USAID transfers funds between projects, making it hard for anybody to sort of track the funds. Can you elaborate?
Well, sure. And so, part of what happened is that one of the media organizations in Germany, one of their big television stations, NDR, really turned the tables on OCCRP and began an investigation. USAID admitted on camera that they had routed money from the State Department's Law Enforcement Bureau through USAID just for optics reasons, admitting on camera that they did that because they knew that it would look bad for an investigative journalism organization to be supported by effectively the cops, by law enforcement. That's not good journalism practice. That violates basically every code of ethics by every journalism organization in the world. They also acknowledged that USAID has to agree to OCCRP's work plan and that they have to agree to their key staff. And this was all literally recorded on video, USAID officials saying this. Then afterwards, OCCRP denied it. They just said that that wasn't true. It just asserted that it was false. So, I mean, really what you're looking at with OCCRP and also Internews is that these are really vectors of disinformation. They spread disinformation and then demand censorship on the basis of it. That's what they did with the COVID lab leak, as the chairman was mentioning. First, they spread the disinformation that it was a conspiracy theory that it could have come from a lab, when of course their own scientists suspected that's what it was. And then they demanded censorship on the basis of it. Same thing happened with Hunter Biden, and we see that playbook, I think, underway here today, where when you actually when journalists start to expose these misdeeds, they just project and say, you're spreading a conspiracy theory, and of course that has been traditionally the basis for demanding censorship.
In 2022, the Biden administration donated $344 million to United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian refugees, and continued to donate hundreds of millions of dollars throughout 2023 and during the Israeli-Hamas war. We now know Hamas terrorists were stealing food and supplies intended for humanitarian purposes. So was the U.S. government funding a terrorist organization?
It sure looks like that, and I haven't investigated that particular case. But I think one of the big lessons from all of this, we may remember, those of us that are old enough to remember what we were learning after 9/11 is that was a process of blowback. We had been arming the Mujahideen, and we had been in alliance with the folks that actually then, their networks then ended up creating the 9/11 attacks. So I think what we're seeing here, starting to blow back on us, where we see the disinformation and censorship being weaponized against the American people, because we have a USAID complex that's been completely unaccountable. Obviously, the Inspector General wasn't doing his job right, and therefore I think merits this very serious audit. And I agree with the chairman, if there's good stuff that they have been doing, and I don't doubt that there has been, then it should make the case for it and be added in back later, rather than sort of that we all assume that everything's fine.
All right. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Kim.